We're now delighted to hear our chairman, Roger Helmer.
Ewan, thank you very much for that introduction. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm extremely proud to be on the same bill as Christopher and Sammy and Ewan. And it's great to be here this evening. You've heard three great speeches, so I'll try not to take too long, but I'm reminded of an experience that I had during the European election campaign. And we had a hustings, and we had a whole line of candidates, including many who never got elected. And there was one of those final questions, you know, it's like any questions, they ask a sort of quick, funny question at the end. And the quick, funny question at the end was this. It was, if you are elected, how will you travel to Brussels and Strasbourg? And along at the far end was the Green candidate. They started with the Green candidate. The Green candidate said, if I'm elected, of course I'll go by train. And they went along the line. I was at this end. They went along the line, each person, oh yes, of course I'll go by train. Of course I'll go by train. And the chairman said, well, it looks as though everybody's agreed we're going to go by train. Mr. Helmer? And I said, well, for 10 years I've been flying, and I will continue to fly. And oh, from the audience. And I said, I tell you what, when I get on that plane, there will be Bill Newton-Dunn from the Lib Dems, and there will be Glenys Wilmot from the Labour Party, so let's have a bit less hypocrisy from those candidates. Everybody flies. It's the only way, frankly, to get there. Yes, I have to admit it, ladies and gentlemen, I am a member of the European Parliament. I apologise for that. It's a dirty job, but somebody has to do it. However, I must respond to a serious slander that's been put on me by Mr. Booker over there. I am not a servant of the European Union. I am a servant of 4.2 million people in the East Midlands of the United Kingdom who elected me. And that is why my slogan is working for the East Midlands in Europe, not Europe in the East Midlands. But if you look at my car, which is immediately outside the door, and check the bumper sticker, you will see a different slogan. What it says is, love Europe, hate the European Union. And the best thing is, the European Union paid for that. But seriously, I think we have to do something about the environment. So I feel I've done my bit. I bought a green car. British racing. It was some 3 years ago, I think, that I started taking an interest in this climate issue. And as soon as I started reading up about it and studying it, it seemed to me very clear that there was something wrong with the theory. And I'll just summarise for you the things that struck me. Temperatures have risen in the last 100 years by about 0.7 degrees centigrade. You know, you read the hysteria, you'd think we were up 3, 4, 5 degrees. We're not. We're up less than 1 degree in a century. Now, if you look at the history of the world over 100 years, 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years, 100 million years, that is a relatively slow rate of change. And if you look at the last 10,000 years, there is a clear pattern of climate cycles. Go back to the Roman period when they were growing grapes by Hadrian's Wall. There was the Roman Optimum. And note that word optimum. It was warm. People liked it being warm, so they called it an optimum. We called it an optimum. You then move on to the Dark Ages, which were cold. You then come along to the medieval warm period, the great cathedral building period of Europe. And it was very warm. When the Vikings got to Greenland, guess what? It was green. Then you had the Little Ice Age. We went down into a cold period. At the very end of it, you had Dickens' childhood, and he remembers all the snow and the the fat robins, and that sort of fed into the Dickensian story of Christmas. Since Dickens' time, it's been getting gradually warmer. We are moving gradually into a 21st century optimum. It is all consistent with well-established, natural, long-term climate cycles. And the idea that we have to find some other explanation is absurd. And as several of our speakers have already pointed out, of course, it is not warming in the last 10 years. 1998 is the warmest year in living memory. Since then, it has been getting cooler. How long can we go on having hysteria about global warming when the globe isn't warming? We've also heard a lot about these computer models. Now, the computer models vary enormously, and as somebody over there said, rubbish in, rubbish out. What you put in to start with determines what you get out. But there is one consistent feature of just about all the computer models. There is a pattern of warming. And the pattern of warming, in terms of altitude and latitude, they all predict that the greatest warming takes place in the upper troposphere, in the equatorial area. It's high in the sky, and it's by the equator. However, all the evidence from satellites and from meteorological balloons shows that the little warming there has been is mainly northern hemisphere and mainly on the surface. This is like fingerprints in forensic science. There is a pattern, a signature, a fingerprint predicted by the models. It is entirely different from the fingerprint observed in reality. That should be sufficient, in my view, to disprove the theory. Sammy told us about this point, about the oceans and about CO2 and temperature. If you've seen the Al Gore film, you will have seen him showing those two graphs over an extended period, a graph of temperature and a graph of CO2, and they fit perfectly. And Al Gore says that proves it. Well, he's right, it does prove it, but as Sammy's rightly pointed out, if you go into close resolution, what you find is that the two graphs are slightly staggered, and the temperature graph comes first, and the CO2 graph comes afterwards. Temperature changes for all sorts of mainly astronomical reasons, and temperature drives CO2. CO2 does not drive temperature. Another point, sorry, I hope I'm not doing too much science here, but I think this is really interesting. If you talk to any atmospheric physicist, the relationship between atmospheric CO2 levels and what they call the climate forcing effect, the greenhouse effect, is well understood, and it's governed by an equation that just about everybody, including the IPCC, agrees with. And that equation is not Al Gore's exponential equation, it is exactly the reverse. It's a negative logarithmic equation that goes like that. And we are already so far up the curve that frankly you can double the CO2 in the atmosphere and it will make very little difference. I tried this out on a couple of IPCC scientists who were in the European Parliament, and they said, we know that, but we think there may be positive feedback effects with other constituents of the atmosphere. And indeed, they are right, there may be. But there is no evidence of those positive feedback effects, and many scientists believe there may be negative feedback effects. So that is entirely speculative, there is no evidence for it, and they're spending, as we've heard, trillions of dollars for that reason. A point that I think is absolutely magic is that NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, the US Space Agency, of course studies the solar system. And they've looked at Mars, and they've looked at the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. And guess what? During this period when the Earth has got warmer by 0.7 degrees centigrade, they've actually noticed a reduction in the ice caps on Mars and a slight warming on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. Now, surely any rational person is going to say, therefore we must look for a solar explanation. As John Redwood famously said, there are no 4x4s on Mars. Not so far as we know. And the last point on the science is this point about consensus. They say there is a consensus. All the scientists agree, including the IPCC. Well, Christopher's told us a bit about the IPCC. I, in fact, am organising a conference in Brussels. You're all welcome to come on November the 18th. And I have two people who are on the IPCC panel and actually have the Nobel pin, you know, because the IPCC, with Al Gore, received the Nobel Prize, and all the 2,500 scientists got their Nobel pin. And my friend Professor Fred Singer at the University of Virginia proudly and ironically wears his pin. And Hans Bohm, who is actually not a scientist at all, but an economist, who is coming to our event, wears his pin. And it is not true that there is a consensus, because not only are there thousands of scientists outside who disagree, but there are scientists within the IPCC 2,500 panel who profoundly disagree. There's a guy called Reiter, who's an expert on R-E-I-T-E-R, who's an expert on tropical medicines. And he has specifically denied this proposition that malaria will come north with temperature. He points out that the worst malaria outbreak in recorded history actually took place in Siberia. Malaria is not a condition of warm temperatures. Malaria is a condition of dirty water. So that is what convinced me that there is a serious problem with the theory. I had a first event in the European Parliament. We had Lord Lawson making the keynote speech back in 2007. On Monday, this very coming Monday, we will be in Strasbourg. And I have this new movie that's just come out of America. It's having its global premiere about now. It features Al Gore on the cover, and the title is Not Evil, Just Wrong. and I'm delighted to be showing that.